Very challenging. And one of the things that one of my support staff, we have a lot of staff support this, one of the counselors said, you can't stand in the way of their growth. You have to let them fall. You have to let them trip up. When a kid is riding a bicycle, you can only hold them up so long, and then they're going to go, and they're going to crash, and they're going to scrape their knees or bang their heads. You got to put them back on and let them ride the bike. Eventually, they will learn to ride the bike. Are the Cuban people going to go through more bloodshed? I hope not. I met Joanny Sanchez, and she said something wonderfully hopeful. And I am an intrinsic romantic and optimist. And I am a profound admirer of Jose Marti. And I believe in La Rosa Blanca. I really do. And I think that Cubans, as Joanny told me, I said, Joanny, aren't you worried about a bloody revolution, a bloody uprising? And she said, I hope that Cubans have forgotten how to hate. I hope they have. Because they will have to do something. Because what they have now is fundamentally unsustainable. Cuba is deconstructing as a nation. It is deconstructing. And the reason I dare to say what I said here tonight, which is very difficult for me to say, is because I honestly believe that one of the reasons for the deconstruction is that it is so easy for people to come over and have this wonderful world that we have created, apañados by the beauty and the glory of the United States of America. Cuba needs to find its own glory. It already has the beauty. It has the potential. It has everything it needs to be a magnificent country. It can be so again. But its people need to believe in themselves. And they need to be able to ride that bicycle by themselves without the training wheels.
If I can comment on that, I don't see it the same way, and that is, one, we're in the restaurant and eating. My father had a saying, and he was, el hambre duele, hunger hurts. And I remember that I could not eat, chicharo se dice chifti? I cannot stand to see a chicharo today. I just want everybody to understand it. And that was because it's a complicated situation, because one of the funny things is that one of the ladies who used to scream at my mother, los gusanos comen la sobra. The worms eat the leftovers. And I remember this as a small child. And then I remember the strange dynamic of the lady sending letters to my mother asking her if she could send her medicine from Miami. And Cuban dynamics are strange, because the thing is, though, that we all are related to somebody, as my mother would say, she was from the other side. Pero there's no need, and her phrase was, no es necesario ser pesado. There's no need to be disagreeable in a way. And so it's really complicated, because we're all connected in a messy way. My last quote from my family is, my father's favorite line at the end of his life was that he didn't know who to be angry at anymore, because everybody who was angry at him and with whom he was angry was dead. And one of the interesting things is that he said that two of them were going to be 2 drawers down from where he expected to be. And so he said, I don't know what the arguments are anymore, but I know that there are still problems. I know that we still have the same mass organizations of repression. We still have the same authoritarian government. We still have the same restrictions. That if you have the power, you're great. If you're out of power, you're not. The goal has to be, and this is my thing, once that machine is gone, then let's go try the little bicycle. Which is, by the way, interesting, because given the investment vehicles that most Cuban Americans have to invest in for future Cuba, but that's a different topic. But the thing is, where's the change? Where's the change? Other than one brother versus the other brother. Really? Where's the change? I don't see it. Yes, now more people are traveling there, that's not the government changing. Why is it that the government is unwilling to change? If the government is willing to change, then let's talk. But the government is not willing to change. The government talks a good game of change, but it doesn't change.
Yes, I have a question. I sort of kind of feel like you felt in terms of identity, because I came as a very young child. But my question is it fair of us, because we have mentioned that, in international also, that we are here. Okay, so it's very easy for us to pass judgment on those who are there, right? But is it fair of us as a society of Cuban Americans, okay, to expect that idea of tough love in a society that 50 years, okay, has been stripped of every conceivable thing you can imagine, of hope, of ambition, right, for obvious reasons? Is it fair of us to expect that from them to sort of pick themselves up by their own bootstraps? Because it's convenient for us to sit here and talk about it, but what about them? We're on the other side of the street.
Well, I want to address that, because it's actually worse than that. The answer obviously is no, it's not fair. But it's actually, the project of interrogating the Cuban Adjustment Act is more mean-spirited, even than the way you pose it. Because the logic of asking the question is that new Cubans aren't acting like refugees. So they don't deserve refugee status because they go back and forth. So those aren't real refugees. That's a disingenuous argument. This is the Cuban Adjustment Act. It doesn't create refugee status. It uses the authority that one mentioned, parole status. Cuban Americans who came in under the act aren't refugees. There's something else. The Cuban Adjustment Act is a blank check that says, I'll take anyone you're selling, we're buying. You have to ask yourself, why would a country like the United States do that? Countries don't have friends, they have interests. And this country is very good at its interests. So I think you do have to ask yourself, what was this about? Clearly, when Cubans were Cold War trophies, and that's what we were. When Cuban emigrants were Cold War trophies, they were welcome. Now the Cold War's over. The question, we're not trophies anymore. The question is, what do you do about the acquired interest? So, but what I say that because I think you have to challenge the narrative that, oh, the new Cubans aren't acting like refugees. Well, neither were the old Cubans, because the moment that Cubans could go back in the 80s, they went. So I just wanted to qualify.
Your point is very well taken, and I think that, I hope I conveyed to you how tortured my logic is. I'm not going to say, sí, atracamos la puerta porque todos son igual a nosotros. Not at all. And by the way, I really profoundly disagree with the thing about los cubanos de ahora son diferentes a los de antes. No lo son. El cubano es cubano. And I saw it when I went there. Y la generosidad del cubano and the beauty of the spirit of the Cuban is alive and well. They just don't wear as nice a clothes as we do. But the Cubans are as Cuban today as they were in 1898 in La Marina. That has not changed. So I arrive at my conclusion with a tremendous amount of torture. But let me take issue with something that you said and challenge your thought process. The training wheels are to be taken off when the government changes. We've been arguing that for 60 years, and we have given the power to the Cuban government. We have said that to the Cuban government, hasta que tú no cambies, yo no voy a hacer nada. No, sorry, it doesn't work that way. The Cuban government will change when the Cuban people make it change, not when the United States of America or Cuban Americans make it change. Is there a possibility that Cubans may have to revolt and be killed? Cubans had to revolt in La Guerra de los 10 Años and were killed with huge numbers. And they revolted again in 1895 and were killed in very large numbers. And they revolted again in 1933 against Machado and were killed in very large numbers. And they revolted again in 1952 against Batista and were killed in very large numbers. And they revolted against Fidel Castro from 1960 to 2014 and were killed in significant numbers. So it is impossible. The birth of a nation, America had its dead, Britain had its dead, France had its dead. I don't like people getting killed. I hope that Cuba has a velvet revolution like Czechoslovakia. Václav Havel is one of my heroes. I hope it happens that way. I don't know how it's going to happen. But I will tell you this. I think we need to change. You talk about changing narratives. The narrative we need to change is the narrative of we're not going to do anything until the government changes. No, we need to do things so that the government will be forced to change.
Thomas, I won't misquote you and say that you said that Cubans are revolting.
I like that.
But life is a series of puns, okay? You get them where you can. So, we need to think about it, not from the perspective of just Cuban history. And it's not a question of, the Cuban Adjustment Act exists because circumstances created it. And we here are beneficiaries. We walk with our feet. That's how we voted. We live in really nice places in the United States, driving very nice cars, very nice suit. But we don't have standing. The ladies in white, they are the ones. The people who risk their lives on a daily basis as real advocates within the island, those are tough people. The people willing to stand up in Cuba and who sit as political prisoners, they are the ones. We are not those people. We are like the Christian cowards who did not we're not going to the Coliseum. We went to Miami, or in Coral Gables in Key Biscayne, just to be fair. The important thing here is it's a different discussion. As to the change, it's simply that the circumstances have not changed to call for a change in the Cuban Adjustment Act. If the circumstances were different, and I don't know what the magical moment will be. I assume at one point we'll all go like, oh my God, we'll keep quoting musicians. And so the question is, when it is no longer an issue, that's great. But right now, it's still a vehicle, and to me, again, I'm not even an academic, I'll give you that. As a matter of fact, some people would tell me how much you look. But the question is, how is it that we can help individuals? That's to me what the law is in the end. If an individual is not given an opportunity to benefit from the law, does the law create life? Does the law create opportunity? Does it create freedom? And if we could just go ahead and bring in even more, I'm fine with that. You mentioned the Syrians, you mentioned, as a matter of fact, they're still there, we have the Syrians here in South Florida. You didn't know that. Let's throw in anybody, because the question is that there's this misperception that we are overwhelmed, that we are flooded. The know-nothing mentality, and I'm not saying that that's the case here, but the know-nothing mentality in the United States of the extreme right wing and of certain parts of the left wing too, who say, no, we're not the United States anymore. What are you talking about? Notice how we have this big discussion about being Cuban American. Why is no one concerned about Irish Americans? Scandinavian Americans? Why is...
Well, they don't have an adjustment act.
What? They don't need it. The Scandinavians are polite to each other. The Irish...
The Irish?
I know that's supposed to be
Only that, so we can hear you guys.
we are supposed only to ask questions. The question is explaining why we're asking the question, because the first for clarification, of this clarification of Pedro Hondo, I am Cuban. I came 40 years ago. I am still Cuban. I never have to go to American citizenship. I love the country. I ain't going to go back to my country. It's the difference. Not everybody is Cuban. And when you refer to the Cubans, because those Cubans are going to become American citizens. But they are Cubans here that don't become American citizens. permanent resident. Decide to go. First question. We have been very emotional for the practical way. The Cuban Adjustment Act is tied to the Helms-Burton. And in the Helms-Burton are the conditions, specific conditions for the repeal of the law. So it's not a problem of emotional, it's not a problem of where to put it. So it's tied to the Helms-Burton, and in the Helms-Burton are the specific conditions that have to happen in Cuba to repeal the Cuban Adjustment Act. I want that to comment about that. The other thing that I want you to comment. Every time the American government and the Cuban government meet to discuss the famous 1996 agreement, the Cuban government say, repeal the Cuban Adjustment Act, and the United States say, let's sign a deportation agreement. If the United States, and this is the question, sign a regular deportation agreement with the Cuban government, as the United States has with any other country, what will happen with the Adjustment Act? Because the Cuban can be deported then, and they cannot be detained indefinitely because of a decision of the Supreme Court of the United States. So, what will happen to the Cuban Adjustment Act if the United States and Cuba sign a deportation agreement?
Let me respond to your point on Helms-Burton. Okay. Helms-Burton is the creature of Cuban exile politics. You know that, and I know that. And Helms-Burton has a peculiarity in American law, just like the Cuban Adjustment Act. It hardwires American foreign policy towards Cuba. There are two provisions of Helms-Burton that define with tremendous specificity what a transitional government is and what a quote-unquote democratically elected government in Cuba is. And it is in the law of the United States of America. It does not afford the president any discretion. Under the Constitution of the United States, it's supposed to be the executive power that has discretion in foreign policy. Helms-Burton blew that out of the water, completely blew it out of the water. And it is a creature of Cuban exile politics, and it was the creature of the shoot-down of the Brothers to the Rescue. That's the reality. That's the truth. That is the way that works. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? We can have, that's a subject for another evening of debate. That could take 5 or 6 hours of debate. Your other question is the deportation, and that's a more, I think that's a better question to frame in the discussion we're having today. One of the issues that is ongoing between the United States and Cuba is, and it's typical of the recalcitrant positions taken by the Cuban government. There are a number of Cubans that came here that don't qualify and have not had their adjustment given to them because they're bad people. They're bad people. And Cuba doesn't want them back. You know why? Because they threw them out. They gave them to us, and we get to keep them. And they don't want them back. Okay? And there are also bad Americans in Cuba that Cuba won't give back to us. And that's just the way it is. That's the way Cubans work. And part of it also is a perverse reaction to this totally magical reality that we have had with Cuba for over 60 years.
I wanted to respond to the first part, the Helms-Burton part of what Pedro said. I want to expand on what he said, express alignment. I'm not going to address the deportation issue. In the United States, there are two minority groups that have had unrivaled success in having a disproportionate influence on U.S. policy. There are two groups that have managed to take a private, ethnic, parochial interest and convert it into U.S. foreign policy. Jewish Americans, in terms of policy towards Israel and the Middle East, and Cuban Americans. I'm a member of the second, so I'll address the second one. But what they both have, and what I'm working against is a background of the United States. Again, countries don't have friends, they have interests. It's very good when it comes to foreign policy. In both Middle East and Cuban issues, you have to ask yourself, gee, is the U.S. doing things consistent with its traditional opportunistic nature? I'm not saying that how U.S. foreign policy is conducted is good. I'm just saying there's a baseline of self-serving opportunism. When I see a deviation from that, I want to know why. So what explains that anomaly that Pedro was talking about is the incredible success of the Cuban-American political class. It's incredible. And is that good? I don't know. But it's a fact. And I actually think Helms-Burton won't be a problem because the moment they cede, the moment they step back, The rest, I mean, you know, it'll be very easy to amend Homes Grove, so I just.
Just an aside in a way, the big issue with Cuban migration now is not illegal migration. Remember that most of the rest of the world has a maximum number of immigrants. And through the parole mechanism, Cuba has a minimum. And so it isn't that you have people, you really don't have a bacero anymore. That tragic period has ended for the most part. And for a while there, Cubans were high-speed boating other Cubans, and not in a very humanitarian way, not in the patriotic sense, but in the, I remember one incident where basically if you didn't grab on, they would not turn around for you. That's a different topic. The situation here is, if you arrive in the United States and you have the resources to have a lawyer, I assure you, you can make it more than a year in the United States. If you don't have the resources, you don't have much of a chance of anything. And it's important to understand that whatever transition will happen will be messy. Now, I think that I'm hoping that it doesn't become a bloodbath. But there's vengeance, there's blood feuds, there are personal vendettas that that's a different thing. But should we govern ourselves based on these individual circumstances? I don't agree with people being bad. I think that people have committed crimes. I also think that there are people who are severely mentally ill and who were, because of their mental illness, were involved in criminal acts and now are labeled as criminals, when in fact they were severely mentally ill and should have been treated as such. Cuba has used that as a weapon in many instances. It's really complicated. All I'm asking is that we cannot, I understand the need for policy. I just always look at the individual. And if 22,000 plus a year can find their way out, that's great. I don't understand the need, not just to close the door, but to not try to figure out better solutions. Because here we are having a debate about immigration. There are so many people, and I'll give you an example. There are extreme right-wing conservatives who today feed hungry people in Cuba in a very admirable, quiet way. And you go, wow, this is an amazing thing, that these individuals are willing to do this. And they are part of the solution, because they see hungry people and they are feeding them. Part of the solution is people arrive here and need legal services, so certain people arrange for that to happen. And I don't begrudge people, if you're hungry, so what if we give you the SNAP program benefit? So what if we give you the food stamps, whatever you want to call that, food stamps now, whatever. We need to not judge solutions or make decisions for solutions in order to punish those who abuse what's available. We need to continue to think about, there are people who arrive and who are going to be public charges and who need to be taken care of. And so what? It's not that the country is really broke. It's not. Really. A White House reception is not cheap. They can serve cheaper wine. We can still take care of people. We take care of refugees in the legal sense. We're not taking care of enough of them. We are being irresponsible. And I think that we individually need to be careful and not ignore the need, the suffering that exists in Cuba. We need to help. We need to help the human rights activists. We need to help the starving. We need to help, as one of my aunts recently wrote, "Ni me mande puerta," don't send me a door because they'll kill us for the door. Because they're afraid. Because these two old ladies said, it's like, don't send us a door. You can send us a door, but if you send us a door, someone might think we have money and then we'll have another problem. So don't send us a door. Why are we not figuring out solutions to help the vulnerable on the island and help those here? How many of us in this room take action on a daily basis to help someone who is suffering? Forget the Cuban issue, on any basis. And we don't. We have an obligation, and we're not fulfilling.
I think one more question, considering the hour.
I'd like to say thank you always to the Cuban Music Institute for bringing such great, coordinations and meetings. This has been so great. I came when I was 2 years old, and I'll tell you one thing. Bloodshed, that's always going to happen. But what about the pyramid? Because there is such a thing as a pyramid. What about in the pyramid, that puppeteer that's on top of the pyramid? Who is that puppeteer that puppets all the rest of us? The ones here and the ones over there. If we were to find out who that puppeteer is, that would be the root cause, and that's where we would have to concentrate on, so there will be no bloodshed. It's very easy to say that, that the people over there should do something. I know musicians, like my friend David, who is doing something. He's an underground hip-hopper, a Cuban underground hip-hopper, and he is doing something. He is going all over countries, telling them the truth about what is being lived in Cuba. When he goes back to Cuba, they persecute him. They persecute him and let him know, you better be quiet, and you better not do one little concert of yours. And he still goes on, he does it. And when he stands up on stage here in Miami, Florida, what he says is that we have to go inside ourselves because we are spirit. It's beyond this, it's beyond the flesh. We have to go inside ourselves because love is what prevails. And it's very easy to live here in the United States, but we're surrounded by materialism. And that is always, and that, I just wanted to say that, I'm sorry, I didn't have, you said two times, you said something that I feel that is true, convenience. There's always been a convenience, okay? We don't live, I love the United States, I'm here, but we're no angels. We have a lot of bloodshed, okay, in our hands. Just as much as the kids. So, who is the middleman? We gotta cut the middleman.
So what's the name?
The puppeteer. I have very good news for you. Excellent.
It's beyond Fidel.
Oh, no. I have terrific news. The puppeteer lives inside each one of us. Okay? And somebody once said, hay un pequeño Fidel adentro de cada uno de nosotros. Okay? And it does go beyond Fidel because Fidel, unfortunately, he was the puppeteer. He no longer is. He's now incapable of being a puppeteer. But the evil that he has done and the seed that he has put inside each one of us is still alive inside each one of us. And that's the puppeteer. And it is that system, and it is that horrible facet. And I just said how wonderful Cubans are, but we're also not perfect. And there is a facet of our national character that has that little Fidel inside each one of us. And it's envious, and it's intolerant, and it is harsh, and it is cruel, and it looks down on other people, and it says if you didn't arrive in 1960, you don't deserve the name of being a true Cuban, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And that's the puppeteer. And I agree with you, and I also agree with what you just said, and we know who we're talking about, that the solution is to reach out directly to the Cuban people. Because at the end of the day, esto es un problema entre cubanos. Esto es un problema entre cubanos. One of the cardinal sins that we have committed as a country and as a nation, and this goes back, I think if you go back to the Aztecs, who were probably doing it. With the Aztecs, we did it with the Spanish, we did it with the Americans, we did it with the Russians, and now we're doing it with the Venezuelans. And because Cuba is an island, we have always looked to the outside for the solution. There is no solution outside. The solution is inside. It's inside the island, and it's inside each one of us. That's the puppeteer. But the good news is that the embodiment of that puppeteer, Fidel Castro, que sí tiene la culpa, is no longer a player, and the day he physically, and I can't wait for that day. I can't wait for that day. The day he physically exits from the scene, then all is possible.
I want to use your questions. I was in a Rutgers Race and Law Review. I think what you're asking is, how do you figure all this out? And I think there's only one way to answer that, and that's go to Cuba and find out. Because people in Miami live in a state of willful ignorance. They decided years ago that they didn't want to know, so they closed their eyes to the present and keep reliving the past every day, every day. Every day is yesterday. The Cold War is still alive and well. If you want to know Cuba, go, fall in love, meet people. That's the only way you're going to find out what's going on there. Now, the problem is, Cuba is under a trade embargo. Miami's under an intellectual embargo. Because we don't know, and we're unwilling to know. So I wrote an essay called The Cuban-American Oedipal Conflict, El Grito de la Yuma. And it's about the need to go, because that same thing happened to me. My family was horrified when I went. Well, it was only by going that I understood what my family was about, what we had lost, and what it meant to be Cuban-American. It's a tremendous irony. So if anyone wants it, I'm happy to send it to you by PDF, so send me an email and I'll send you the article.
I'll slightly disagree. I think that there are two things. One is, if you have to go and take care of something, if you're going to go and make a difference. But if you're going to go to the tourism of suffering, which I find reprehensible, and there are people who just love to see poor people, and don't do that. But if you really have to go take care of something, that's a different thing. But we see that there are people who, it's, I like to say that it's sort of like people who like the same ones who put the rosary on their rearview mirror, the ones who dress like they're Buddhist, but they have no idea what Buddhism is. And then there are people who, I call them la banderita, because they have Cuban flags, and yet they have no idea what